Okay, so we're live. So welcome everyone. This is Divi Seattle. I am Shane. My co-host here is Braden. We're going to go over how to optimize your website, your Divi website, to make it fast. We're going to go over some general best practices for speed, some Divi specific ones, and then get into some more technical areas. Before we begin tonight, does anybody have any questions? Cool. All right, let's get into it then. So I'm going to start sharing. All right, can we all see my screen? Yeah, cool. So I have here a super fancy Google Doc with a bulleted list of everything we're going to cover tonight. So speed is a little intangible. So we're going to kind of go through this list. We're going to talk about the concepts. We can pull up some tools and live examples. But I want this to be kind of interactive. If anybody has a website they want me to look at and bring up on the screen in front of everyone to diagnose, send it in the chat, and then we could use that as an example. So speed. The first thing we're going to talk about today is how to measure speed, because that does matter. So there are two different ways that we're going to talk about measuring speed. One is, does it feel fast to you? When I load the website, I click around, does it feel fast? So, you could judge that on your own, or you could use a test for that. The test I like to use for that is called GT metrics. So that's like level 1. Level 2 is the Google Lighthouse page speed test. That's the one that is very difficult to score well on, especially with Divi. So let's start off with the GT metrics tool. So I have a Divi demo that I put together a while ago. I'm going to go ahead and throw this into the GT metrics tool. This will go ahead and scan it. Here we can see it's checking from Canada. My server's in Seattle, so pretty close. And it's checking from Chrome on the desktop. Speed, whether it's measured from desktop or mobile, is a huge difference. Desktops tend to have more powerful CPUs. They can load all the JavaScript a lot quicker. Mobile phones tend to be not as powerful and on slower internet connections. So here we go. With this basic site I did, we get a score of a B. All right. Look at these two numbers here to kind of evaluate that. So this site scores pretty well. I'll go ahead and just drop it in the chat. You can click around to the different links on it. There you go. You can click around to the different links on it. It should load pretty quickly. All right, so if you want a site that just kind of feels fast, there's only so much that you have to do. It's not too hard to accomplish with Divi. So the other way to measure speed is with Google's Lighthouse page speed test. As I mentioned earlier, this test is a lot more difficult. This test is available in a whole bunch of different places. One of them is Pagespeed Insights, and I'm going to share a link to this document in the end, so you can click all these links yourself. But if you want to check the other test, the Google test, this is the link for that. You can Google Pagespeed Insights and you'll pull it up. So if I stick my same URL into this test, it's going to give us a much different score than a B, I'd imagine. So essentially this Lighthouse test, Google has built into the Chrome browser. So anytime anybody loads your web page from any browser that's Chrome-based, it runs this test in the background. Google then aggregates all that data and pushes it into all these different areas. One of them is it's going to use that for a ranking algorithm update that's coming out in August. So right here, we see that we score a 60 on mobile, which actually isn't too bad for a Divi site. Desktop, we have an 86. Great. What really matters is mobile, because Google indexes your website on mobile. So this is the one that matters. It's going to be a lot harder to score well on here than it will be on, say, the GTmetrix one. What's important to know about this test is that it uses, to do this test, it uses a simulated low-tier or mid-tier mobile device. What does that mean? A pretty slow smartphone, specifically a Motorola G4. Basically, if you're trying to load a website on, a cheap phone, it's going to load slower than it will on a new iPhone. And that just has to do with the processing power of the phone. Also, this loads it from a 3G connection, a fast 3G connection. So basically, everything is against you when you're loading this test. So keep in mind that this is going to score you much poorly than it probably will when you're looking at your website on your phone. All right, so you'll probably check out your website on your phone. You'll be like, oh, okay, it's pretty fast. You'll check this. It'll tell you you're doing horrible. So keep in mind that's expected. So this test you can access, through this website. It's also built into the Chrome browser. So if I come over here, I'm going to take this URL and I'm going to put it into an incognito window. So if you're testing this in your browser, it's important to do this so that your Chrome extensions don't affect the test. So I'm going to go to it in incognito. I'm going to right-click and inspect the page. Up here in the top left, I'm going to click the little arrow, click on Lighthouse. And you can uncheck. All these boxes will be checked by default. Uncheck them all. Just make sure performance is checked. And all we care about is mobile. Generate report. It will essentially run a similar test. So this is another way to access that Google test. Here we go. It gives me a 46. So your test scores will vary from test to test. Keep that in mind. But this Chrome report will tell you specifically what you need to do, what you need to fix in order to speed up your website. So what we're going to talk about today is some of the things you can change in Divi to improve this off the bat. How to run this test, let's say on your website, where you might have a whole bunch of plugins and third-party scripts and other things going on, and how we can improve some of those as well. So before we move on to why is my Divi site so slow, does anybody have any questions about how to test their website? I see we have one hand up. Karen? Karen, you're muted.
Can you tell us the name of the site you were just demonstrating? I missed hearing you and I can't see it.
So this is a demo site that I built, and the link is in the chat.
No. Oh, thank you.
Yep. Does anybody else have any questions?
I wasn't asking about your site. I was asking about what you used to test it, that you were saying was better or harder than GTmetrix.
So that is Google's Pagespeed Insights.
Ah, okay, thank you.
And I'm going to share this doc at the end of the meeting, so you'll be able to click on all the links.
Great, thank you.
Okay, cool. So part 2, why is my Divi site so slow? All right, so in general, the way websites work, or the way websites used to work, is used to code everything by hand. Well, WordPress is different. WordPress loads a whole bunch of pre-built things that can make it really fast to build a website. But in the back end, it's loading a whole bunch of stuff that you don't really need. Well, that's WordPress. Now within WordPress, there are different flavors. We're using a page builder. That's what Divi is, versus custom coding your own theme. So a page builder like Divi loads a whole bunch of things in order to accomplish any possible design on every single page of your website. So every few months, Divi comes out with a really cool new feature. You know, that could be the animations, it could be the mobile responsiveness, it could be hover effects, it could be the shadows. Every single time Divi comes out with something new, it's great. Well, guess what? Whether you're using that or not, it's loading on the back end of your website on every single page of your website. So it's great because it lets us do just about anything we want quickly. You know, we can build pretty sites, but there's a speed cost essentially. So Elegant Themes is aware of this. You know, everybody's been complaining about it. So we're all here to figure out how we can make our Divi sites fast. At the end of the day, the same platform that makes Divi work, you know, requires that it work in that way, and we can't change that. So Elegant Themes is actually in the middle of rebuilding Divi from the ground up to improve that. These are 3 different things that are supposed to be coming out in 2021 that is going to dramatically improve Divi across the board. So the first thing is called dynamic modules. So in Divi, there's 54 different modules, you know, a slider, a counter, a blog post, whatever. The code for all of that loads on every page, whether you're using it or not. So Divi, or Elegant Themes, is in the process of rebuilding that, so only the modules that you're using on a page load on that page. That is supposed to improve the time to first byte by about 1.5 seconds. It's supposed to go from 2 seconds to 0.5 second. That's going to be a huge improvement. Number 2, dynamic CSS and JavaScript. So all of the possible styling code to load every possible module and every possible combination is loaded on every page, no matter what. That file, for those of us that have tried to fix it, is very large. It's 850 kilobytes and counting. All right, nothing can start loading until that file loads right now. So also Elegant Themes is going to fix that. So we're not loading all of that CSS and JavaScript, only the stuff we actually need to accomplish the features we want. So if we're not using box shadows, the code for box shadows is not going to load on each given page. Pretty cool. Third is critical CSS. This is something that we can try to do with third-party plugins, but they don't really cooperate that well with Divi. Critical CSS says only load the CSS to create the picture that's above the fold. Any CSS that's required for the stuff down here, like these counters, don't load that until I scroll down and need it. Right? So that is also going to be a game changer, and Divi's going to build that in. So we will not need a third party to do that. So those 3 performance improvements are going to fix a lot of the Divi issues that we're experiencing. So today we're not going to really touch on, you know, any big secret to fix Divi, because there isn't one. We just have to wait for them to fix it. What we are going to touch on today is design choices we can make to make our websites fast, development choices, and then general speed optimization best practices. Okay. Does anybody have any questions about that stuff before we move on to Divi design choices? We got a question. When do you project these changes take place? It's supposed to be sometime in 2021. They've been talked about for a few months now. So we're just kind of waiting. It's a big overhaul, a lot of testing. I know that, you know, I've been using Divi since the first release. Every time we get really close to a new major version, you know, usually something big comes out. I think this is the big thing that will come out for Divi 5. So I think we're at 4.9.4 now, so coming soon. Jim says, will changes be optional? So those performance improvements will go out with Divi 5. So if you update to Divi 5, you will have them. If you don't update, you won't have them. All right. So next up, Divi design choices. The whole idea here is just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. Okay, so I think the best case for this is animations. So in Divi, you can do all sorts of cool animations when you scroll down. You know, there's scroll effects and animations. Doing that really slows things down. Really slows things down. I'm going to give you one example. So this is a site I made for a hair salon. Pay attention to the logo when I load the page. And just keep in mind, we did not care about speed for this site. It's just design. So you see how the logo slides down and then the buttons slide down? Looks cool, right? Well, let's go ahead and see what Google thinks. I can go ahead and test this one while I'm at it. Almost there. All right, GT Metrics gives us an A, right? Because they don't really care about that kind of stuff. They're like, great, you did great. Google comes in hot with a 24. So not too good. Why is that? Well, part of it's Divi, but part of it is specifically this animation. So in Google's test, they've come out with 3 different metrics that they really care about. Largest contextual paint, largest contextual paint. The other one is not shown on this test. And then CLS, cumulative layout shift. What that means is as your page is loading, this right here is a screenshot frame by frame of the page loading. Google doesn't want to see things shifting around. They don't want to see your page start to load and then a banner pop up and shift everything down. And part of the reason why is because it's an annoying experience to people. You know, if you're trying to load a page and then you go to click on something and then you know, something pops up and it moves your content down, you're going to click on the wrong thing. So they measure that. They call it CLS. They give us a failing score for this. Why is that? Because you see the logo right here starts to slide down from the top, and also the buttons. If I scroll down in this test, they will actually tell us which elements are contributing to that. And right here, we see that this whole header contributes a lot to it. Basically, Google does not like animations above the fold. So what does that mean? If you want to use animations in Divi, transitions, great. Don't use them above the fold. Does anybody have any questions about that? Cool. So that goes for animations. Scroll effects. So that's, you know, Divi's animated. As you scroll, things move. Looks really cool. Same principle with that. Don't do it above the fold if you can.
I have a question.
I have a.
Oh. Sorry, I got ahead of you there, John.
Go ahead.
It seemed like the way you presented it, Shane, seemed like Google is being a little unfair. I was wondering if you agree with me or not, because the the animation does not occur until the user actually does something. So the animation is not occurring on the web page update, on the load. It's happening after the user interaction commences, and so that seems a little if that's true, if what I just said was true, from looking at the 2 seconds at your website.
So these actually happen on their own. I'll throw a link to this in the chat. But these happen on a timer. It's not on user interaction.
Okay. All right. Thanks for that.
But yeah, so Dave had a good point. So let's say that you have an animation that happens on user interaction. Google will not see that, right? Google does not interact with the page yet once it loads. So that's something we're going to touch on at the very end. That can be a cool trick to speed things up. But
okay, great.
Go ahead, John.
So my question was, you said that Google didn't like it because it was annoying. Well, I guess I thought we were talking about speed, not about design annoyance. Aren't those kind of two different things? If you build something that's kind of annoying to the user, it's a separate issue from speed, right?
So it seems at first like they're not related. The way they are related is the faster a user can start interacting with your website, the better. And cumulative layout shift specifically measures the change in your web page as it's loading. So once it starts loading, you know, we want to know that it's done so we can start interacting with it. We don't want it to look like it's done and then things start moving. So at this point, it looks like I can start interacting with it. Oh, wait, things are still moving. I can't. So that's
okay. It still sounds like a design value judgment to me, whether if you want your users to start interacting with the site as soon as possible, that's your decision. I don't feel that way personally. And I don't care what Google thinks.
So this is a very harsh test. Fortunately, CLS is one of the easier things to fix. Though at the end of the day, this is only worth 5% of the score. So you can take that with a grain of salt if you want. Though the speed update that's going to be coming out in August is going to reward sites that score green on all 3 core web vitals. So you need to get in the green on 3 different metrics in order to get your speed boost. For all of us on the call, if we're using Divi, I would not even worry about that because it's not going to happen.
So Sean, question is, do pop-ups affect the score in the same way as the logo does?
Yes. So if you run your test and if you run your website in this test and you see the pop-up, that's bad. That's actually going to be bad for a few different reasons. One is this metric, largest contextual paint. That measures out of everything you see on the screen, what is the largest visual element? For this website, I think it's the logo. How long does it take that to load? A person feels like, based on user experience data, a person feels like a website's loaded when the largest thing has loaded. So Google wants you to load the largest thing as soon as possible. So if your pop-up loads at the end, which it probably will, that's going to destroy this score and this score.
Thanks.
Yep. Yeah, a good trick on pop-ups is make them load after a user has scrolled a certain amount down the page. All right, so we just touched on animation scroll effects. Okay, number of pages shown on a blog, archive, or an e-commerce page. So let's say we're on a blog page and we're looking at, these are the 10 most recent blog posts. In order for that page to be loaded, 10 things have to load, 10 objects. If you change it to show 100 at a time, that's going to take longer to load. Same with e-commerce pages, tag pages, any kind of archive. Now, caching can help with that, but at the end of the day, try to limit the quantity of items results shown on archive pages. Does anybody have questions about that one?
Just so I'm clear, what we're trying to do here is to get Google to like this page so it'll rank me higher. Is that the point?
That is a small percentage. That is a small part of it. At the end of the day, we want our websites to be fast for users. That's what we care about. Google does care about that to a degree. Google cares a little bit more about less load on their servers, so it costs them less money to crawl our websites. That's what they really care about. But the speed boost that is going to come from getting in the green on all these is going to be minor compared to the increase in revenue that we'll get through better conversion rates. We should want to make our websites faster because users like that and they convert better. It could be e-commerce, it could be a sign up, it could be ad revenue, it could be all sorts of stuff. Faster websites are better across the board. All right, so the next one is background videos. So background videos on this website, I think I had one. Let's see. Not there, where is it? There we go. So background videos, be careful with them. If you upload a background video, so Divi doesn't support like a YouTube background video or anything like that. So you have to host the video file on your server. Unless your server is made for that or you're using a CDN, it's going to load pretty slow. Also, if you don't optimize that video file, it's going to load really slow. Like an average web page is maybe 1 to 3 megabytes, let's say. A video file can easily be, 5 to 10 megabytes after it's optimized. So be very careful with background video. Make sure you optimize it before you upload it. Background images. So a lot of the image optimization things we talk about, whether it's the ones that are built into Divi or WebP images, all sorts of things, those usually don't apply to background images. When you set a background image in Divi, it's going to load the original image. It's not going to load a thumbnail if you're on mobile. All right, so if you upload a 500K image to look pretty on desktop, well, that's also going to load a 500K image on mobile. So a design choice for that might be not loading that massive image as a background image. Maybe you want to do a color instead.
So Shane, doesn't Divi give us a choice as to what happens whether we're in mobile or desktop?
Yeah, so that's a good point, Jim. Yeah, so on mobile you can say don't load that. So on mobile you can say do a color instead, and does some magic on the back end, and it will not load that asset. So very good point. Seema, so you have a hand up?
Can't you choose a lower size? Somebody mentioned that if there's a background image, you can choose a lower dimension for mobile.
You could do that as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess my point is none of that's automatic.
Yeah.
Images are treated completely different than a regular image.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, you can disable them on mobile. You could choose a different one. But yeah, that is choosing a different asset.
Yeah.
All right. Awesome. Up next is fonts in Divi. So I think we should all be aware you don't want to use a different font on every page, right? We want to be smart about what fonts we use. Try to limit them to like 2 fonts or less. If you're not using Google Fonts, make sure you turn it off in Divi. That part's really important. So some websites I work on, I'll either upload custom fonts or I'll use Adobe Typekit fonts, something like that. Well, if you're doing that and you don't actually turn off the fonts, Divi will still load the default font Open Sans. So I'll show everybody where that setting is. Divi theme options to use Google Fonts enabled. If you turn this off, all of our font choices will disappear from the Divi builder, all the different options. So if you're using your own custom fonts, Adobe Typekit, something like that, make sure we turn that off. While we're here, I think, yeah, Google Maps was next. Google Maps, I strongly recommend turning this off as well and not using the Google Map module that comes with Divi. But instead, if you need a Google Map, embed it using the iframe code on Google. I'll show everybody quickly how to do this. You search for a location. It could be a business. It could be a map, anything like this. You search in Google, not on Google Maps. You click on this map icon. That will take you to Google Maps. And you know you're at the right place when you get a share button. Right here, share. So if you search from within Google Maps, you're not going to get the share button. We hit share, we click embed a map, copy HTML, and now you can paste this anywhere on your website. In terms of dimensions, right here in this code, you have a width and a height. What I like to do is do width equals 100%. That'll fill the container of the Divi column or row. And then height, you give it a number. You don't have to type in px, but that is pixels by default. So a common combination for me is width equals 100%, height equals 300, and you'll have a nice square looking map. But use this whenever possible to work with maps instead of Divi's Google Map thing. All right, Recaptcha. Basically, if you're using the Divi contact form, be very careful about connecting Google Recaptcha, because then it will load on every page. So if you're using a custom form plugin, like let's say Gravity Forms, then you could connect Recaptcha that way and will only load on pages where your form lives, where Divi loads it everywhere. Smooth scrolling, that's an option in Divi theme options. I like to keep that turned off because it just adds unnecessary JavaScript, and it can often conflict with speed plugins. So right here, smooth scrolling, I disable that. Okay, and then image use. What this means is essentially be cognizant of the images you use. If you're going to load 20 images above the fold, that's going to kind of destroy your speed scores. So most of the speed optimization stuff refers to above the fold, because everything below the fold, we can kind of like defer and use tricks to kind of speed that up. Everything above the fold has to load in order for a speed test or a user to start interacting with your website. So just be cognizant of the stuff you do above the fold. All right, another break here. Any questions before moving on to images and videos? Okay, cool. So images and videos, this goes to the Divi demo that I shared in the chat. This was from a meetup we did, I think, a year ago. I wrote like a blog post about best practices for images and videos in Divi. That's linked to from here. Feel free to read that. You can get some really in-depth info. But just glancing over this, we want to use SVGs for logos whenever possible. If your logo is, not complex. If you have a pretty simple logo and that's a vector format, you can upload an SVG that'll look super sharp while also taking up like no space. If you're going to upload SVGs in Divi, you need a plugin to allow that. Just type an SVG into the WordPress plugin repository, install any of the first few, and that will allow SVG uploads. But you could see in this little animation, this is like crystal clear, super sharp, while these start to get a little blurry. So whenever you're working with like line art, stuff like that, try to stick with SVG. It's fast, it looks good. What's not to love? Other than that, for the rest of your images, try to only use a PNG when you need a transparent background. You'll see that the same image, when it's a PNG, is like 50% larger than the JPEG. Here's a little table that can help you with that. Let's see. All right, image sizing and compression. Okay, so you want to make sure you compress your images before you upload. Even if you use an image compression plugin, I like to compress first and then upload. It's usually going to be better than the plugin. The website I like to use is compressor.io. Let me see if I have a sample here. Yeah, this could work. So compressor.io, it's just a drag and drop. You can compress JPEG, PNG, anything you want here. Free account, I think they just limit you to like so many per day. So I just drag and dropped a screenshot that I took. It was, 563 kilobytes, dropped it down to 164 for a PNG. Even like Photoshop can't really resize or compress PNGs. Chai asked, why would compressing beforehand and using a plugin be effective? So they're not. I like to do this because it usually will compress much better than any plugin you can install. The file size on this will be smaller. The algorithm it uses is just much better than any plugin I found. If you're doing bulk, use a plugin, but day-to-day updates, just drag it into here beforehand. All right, compression, resizing your images appropriately. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. WordPress has updated in the past year to, I think, force you to resize them if you're uploading a full resolution like smartphone image. Let's see, John asked, when you upload an image, doesn't WordPress or Divi make a whole bunch of thumbnails? Yes, it does. However, not everywhere you can insert an image supports thumbnails, like background images, for example. Inserting directly into posts. Like if you do the old school ad media, it'll usually stick in the full size. So just be cognizant of the size it's actually loading. Okay, so videos, if you're going to use videos, besides a background video, make sure you always throw them on a CDN. That's YouTube or Vimeo or something like that. You never really want to be serving videos, like full, let's say 30-minute long videos from your website. It's just not a good idea. And then, yeah, make sure you optimize your background videos. So I touched on that a little bit. This demo, which is the right one. So this background video, I think I shot it on my iPhone, but it was originally like 4K. What I had done is I actually cropped it. So when you upload videos to a website as like a background video, it doesn't actually need to be in 1920 by 1080 or any standard format. You can crop it and make it super skinny or make it a square. You can actually serve video in any shape you want. So for this particular background video, it was not, we're not using the top 50% and the bottom 50% of the frame, or 30 and 30. We're just using the middle. So I actually just cropped them out of the file. So I reduced the actual dimensions of the video file down to that, and then compressed it and got it down to 2.3 megabytes from, if I hadn't touched that, like if you just toss a video to YouTube as you normally would, 42 megabytes. Chai asked if I have a library. Let's see. If I have a library of videos on a membership site, what do you suggest? So you can do, I believe you could do Vimeo or YouTube. There are different private ways to do that. Or you can serve from a CDN. If you get like really good hosting or a separate content delivery network, you can host your videos there, and that's fine. What I'm more saying is don't serve your videos from like a shared WordPress host, like Bluehost or GoDaddy or, any of those, SiteGround. You want to make sure you're serving them from a content delivery network of some point. All right. So those are best practices for images and videos. Does anybody have any more questions about images or videos before moving on? Cool. So next up, fonts. We talked a little bit about that with the Divi settings. In general, you want to minimize your font usage, each weight. If you load a bold, an italic, a thin, a super bold, each one of those is a separate file. Basically, every weight takes up the same space. So if you load a thin and a regular, that's 2. If you load a bold, it's 50% more file size. So that's straightforward. Third-party scripts. So this is a really important one. So third-party scripts, if you have a chat widget installed, if you have a MailChimp embed installed, any kind of third-party thing like that, it's going to load, like for somebody to load your website, they also have to connect to all those other websites and wait for them to finish before your website loads. So in general, you really want to minimize the third-party scripts that you use. When possible, make sure they are deferred. You can do that with like a speed optimization plugin, or you can make a change to the script to add defer. And that basically says, load this at the end. And I strongly recommend testing your speed before and after third-party scripts. Third parties tend to promise you really easy solutions to things. And while they will do that, there's a huge speed cost for them. So one thing I wanted to do is show off this tool. This one's pretty cool. And Scott, we're going to use your website for this one. And again, this link will be in the doc that I share at the end of this call. Okay, so Scott runs a publishing website, news website. So he has third-party ad networks. Third-party ad networks really, really slow things down. So we're going to jump over to, so we have a Seattle server. We'll do LA. Actually, those have tests. All right. Dulles it is. So while this is loading, does anybody have any questions about third-party scripts? Because that is an area that we probably all are familiar with. Okay. We'll just hang out then.
What is it you're doing right now?
I am running a tool that's going to help us to visualize the impact that third-party ad networks have on a website or any third-party script. Google Fonts, that's a third-party script.
Do you know of any third-party scripts that are especially slow?
You're better off asking, do you know of any that are fast? Because they're all pretty bad.
Okay, so which are the fastest that are common?
So anything hosted on Cloudflare is super fast. Google's tend to be fast except for their ad stuff. So, their fonts are decent. Sometimes this test does not do well if you have a really complex site. So let me switch over. Okay. I'm trying to think of a site with a Facebook pixel. Does anybody want to volunteer their site? Anybody use Facebook on their site? Okay. All right, I'll try mine. There we go. Okay, so this is a visualization map of when you connect to a website. These are all the different requests, third-party requests. Come on, zoom. That have to load in order to load the website. So right here, this is my website, and the bigger the circle, the bigger the file size. The further away from the main circle, the longer of a trip it takes to connect to that third party. So this crazy kind of like string of letters and numbers, this is my content delivery network. So this tool thinks that's a third party. It technically is. But this is the content delivery network that's serving my assets. It's serving my images, my JavaScript, my CSS, all that good stuff. All right, then over here, we see yellow. Yellow, according to this, is CDNs. So these are CDNs for fonts, they happen to be. So I'm using Font Awesome icons on my site, and I'm loading those from the Font Awesome CDN. So here we can see Oh, you think it's just one request? Nope. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Because once we connect to Font Awesome, then they go and fetch 3 of their friends. So that's what's really dangerous about CDNs. You'll think it's just one script, and then they'll go and be like, nope, I have 10 more. That's why ad networks are crazy, because you'll have like 2 ad networks, and you run this, if it will work, it'll show like 300 different trips that your browser has to take to connect to a website. Up here it shows Google Fonts. I'm loading 4 different versions of a font. It's probably 4 different weights. So it shows each one of those. So I suggest using this tool on your website to try to see the impact that third-party fonts have, or third-party scripts have. This will help you identify if you should be, turning off some that you didn't know were on, or replacing some that have a much bigger impact than you thought they did. So I'll drop this in the chat. This is also going to be in that doc that I will link to. Let's see if this ever loaded. Nope. Okay. Oh, I missed a chat. So Sandra asked, what if you accept sponsored posts or advertising direct only? Well, yes, that probably wouldn't slow down your website because you would be serving them from your website. If you serve your own ads, for example, instead of using an ad bidding network, it's not going to be a third-party script. Okay, up next is plugin bloat. So this is a general website thing, but very easy to get carried away with in WordPress. You see a plugin that'll do something cool. You don't have to code it. Great, install it. Well, those can have a pretty big impact. So just do a quick before-after speed test with and without that plugin. So that's 1. 2, you're going to want to look for plugins that are reputable. I always read the description and reviews on a plugin to see if it's fast before I install it. And then last, there are 2 classes of plugins. Ones that load their assets on every page of your website, whether that plugin's on it or not. So let's think about a review plugin, a plugin that might pull in your Google My Business reviews and display them on your website. Well, if that loads the code for that on every page, even though you're only showing that on your reviews page, that's bad. So for your plugins, you want to make sure it's only loading the code on the pages where that plugin lives. That's a good plugin. Any questions about plugins before moving on to hosting?
I'm sorry, Shane. I have one question, kind of one step back from this WebPerf tool that you were using. I just did a quick check on a website using that tool, and there were 6 bubbles that showed up for fonts, for Google Fonts.
Yep.
And I was wondering why I'm getting 6 bubbles instead of 1 bubble. What does that indicate?
You're downloading 6 fonts.
Okay, so 6 different font files, you mean?
They could be in one family. You could be downloading thin, regular, italic, semi-bold, bold, heavy on one font family.
Okay, all right.
Right? It's eye-opening. That tool is pretty cool.
Yeah, I like that. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So now we're just going to touch on hosting a little bit. We're not going to go too in the weeds here, but there are 3 tiers of hosting in general. There's shared hosting, which is going to be your GoDaddy, Bluehost, SiteGround, you name it. If it's under $20 a month, it's shared hosting for the most part. You don't have a lot of control over how fast your website is or how reliably fast your website is with that hosting. Often you're on a server with a bunch of other websites you don't know, And if those other websites have a lot of traffic, your website will be slow. There's so many different factors at play, but if you really care about speed, start there and don't do a shared host. The next tier up is going to be a managed host, usually much better performance. The company you're paying for hosting also does the management and the maintenance of that hosting of the server. Companies in this class are going to be WP Engine, Kinsta, Flywheel. There's probably about a dozen of them. The keyword for that is managed WP hosting. Next level up is going to be your like virtual private server or a dedicated server or something you manage yourself. And if you're doing that, you probably don't need to be in this meeting, to put it simply. So that's hosting. I strongly recommend managed. Besides just the speed stuff, managed hosting will give you daily backups. It'll give you security monitoring, a content delivery network, a whole bunch of other things. Typically, pricing is around 30 to 40 a month for that. Make sure your host has PHP 4 on. PHP is the code that runs WordPress. Every time a new version comes out, it's slightly faster. PHP 4 7.4 is the one that's in production now. PHP 8 is going to be ready very soon. That'll be even faster. Just if you're on an old host, you might be on an old version of PHP. So just make sure that's updated to 7.4. You'll probably notice a 20% speed boost. Some hosts will have built-in caching, such as Varnish or Lightspeed. That will speed things up a lot for you. If you have managed hosting that's built in, you don't need to worry about it. You're just good to go. And then a CDN, a content delivery network. So as we looked at in this, nope, not that one. As we looked at in, let's see if it remembered me. In this, this is my content delivery network, which is coming from WP Engine. That is serving all of my JavaScript files, my CSS files, my images, my videos, all that stuff gets served from a content delivery network. Similar to YouTube, being a content delivery network for video. A regular content delivery network, its job is to deliver your assets fast and reliably. So it will host copies of all your files in servers all around the world, multiple across the US, and you'll connect to whichever server is the closest to you. A lot of people going to your website, it's not going to bog down your website that much because they're downloading most of the stuff from this other place. So it's recommended to have one of those. All right, and now the last part of this meetup is about speed plugins and best practices. So this is why we saved this for last, because if you install one of these, it's not going to be a magic bullet, especially with Divi. You need to kind of make sure you designed and developed intentionally to be fast from the beginning. Assuming that you did that, you can use some speed plugins to try to fix some of Divi's faults. And when you're using multiple plugins and third parties, speed plugins can kind of make them work better together. All different kinds of speed plugins and tools. What do you look for? Start off with an image optimization plugin. A good image optimization plugin will do 3 things. It'll compress them and make them smaller, similar to compressor.io. It'll resize them if they're too big. And then it will generate WebP versions of your images. A WebP is like an alternate to a JPEG. It's a little bit smaller. Not all browsers support them, so it's a little tricky. So you want to rely on the plugin to do that. Then when it comes to optimizing your website in general, you're probably going to want to look for a plugin that will kind of do all of these things. All different ones out there. Everyone has their favorite. Some require more config than others. The one I use is WP Rocket. So these are the 5 features you kind of want to make sure you do. One is lazy loading images below the fold only. This one's critical. So when we load a page, we want to interact with it as quickly as possible. So we want to make sure that all the images above the fold are loaded instantly. Everything below does not load until we scroll down. 2, page caching. Just about all speed plugins will do this. They're going to generate static pages of each one of your website, of each page on your website, and then serve that to the user. That's really all you need to know about that. gzip compression, it compresses things when they're being sent across the web. Just make sure you're doing that. If you run your website through one of these tests, the Google one or GTmetrix, it'll tell you if you're not doing that. Here we get to deferring JavaScript and CSS. So Divi has a toggle button for defer JavaScript and CSS and combine and stuff like that. So this is for non-Divi things. So let's say you have a plugin on your website that loads a chat widget. Well, we probably don't need that to load right away. That can probably load towards the end. So a speed optimization plugin can give you control over which third-party plugins and scripts and stuff load first and which load at the end. In general, anything that's not required to load your page immediately, you want to load at the end. And the last item, this is not offered by a lot of plugins. I know WP Rocket offers this and just a few others. Delay JavaScript. This is similar to something Dave mentioned earlier. So let's say we have a chat plugin. Let me try to find an example of where I'm doing this. Let's say we have a chat plugin. We don't actually need that plugin to load until somebody interacts with the website. So you can actually set a trigger, or the speed plugin can do this, so it doesn't actually load until somebody scrolls, clicks, or interacts with the website. I might have done that on this website, I forget. But I know WP Rocket has that option. Where was I? A few plugins have that option, but that's kind of like, that's what you need to do if you're going to use third-party plugins and you want to get to the green in the Google test. All the JavaScript that you're loading that you do not need to load to see the page, delay it so it doesn't actually start to load at all until somebody clicks or interacts with the page. Very complex, very easy to break stuff doing that. So take that with a grain of salt, but that's probably the most advanced speed technique that we're going to talk about today.
So Shane, these plugins that delay loading, when you install them, do they do something? They put something in the code that says don't pay attention to this particular screen click until something else, some other condition exists. Is that how it works?
So the way, for example, WP Rocket works is it'll take all the JavaScript you don't need to load your website, like everything that's not in the theme, and will automatically not load it until somebody clicks or moves. It does have a list of scripts that it excludes because it knows it breaks things, but that's basically it. That's kind of like the magic speed bullet that a lot of other things are trying to use now, a lot of other platforms. But we reached the end. All right, so I'm just going to switch over to something more friendly than a Google Doc. All right, does anybody have any questions about speed or Divi?
Did you say that these programs that we can use to evaluate speed also give us suggestions as to where we can make changes?
Yeah, they do.
Okay.
So GTmetrix and Google Pagespeed will both give you suggestions on what to do. You can look through here and try your best to interpret it. A lot of this is going to be Divi. So JavaScript is Divi, jQuery, Divi's massive style sheet. These are Google fonts, but the big one is Divi. So out of all these things, the Divi CSS file being massive adds a second to this load time. Properly sized images. Yeah, this is something that you could fix. You could properly size that image. Where is that image? Come on. So we loaded this page. So what's on this page? This is an interactive slider that shows you a before and after compressing an image. So what's going on here? This is a custom Divi plugin that's loading two images on top of each other. Well, that plugin is not speed friendly because right here it's saying make sure you resize those images. Right? Not everything is going to be use best practices. Remove unused JavaScript. That is a Divi thing. It's like, hey, the JavaScript file you're loading is 100 and whatever kilobytes, but you're only using half of that. Well, yes. Yes, we are. Remove unused CSS. Well, in this CSS file, we're only using 1% of that file. Yes, we are.
Okay.
This is all Divi. A lot of these are going to be Divi things. So it's going to be a little hard to read between the lines and see what is Divi. But if you look through here and you look at a script and you see, something related to maybe a plugin you installed, then you might want to look into that plugin. All right, so I see a few different things in the chat. Let me just start at the top here. Sula, where are we? Okay. Sandra asked, I'm assuming WordFence is a heavy load plugin. Yes, it is. Another thing, like I use WP Engine, they take care of security, 99% of the time. So I don't use a security plugin. John says, how do I make sure a plugin only loads on the page where it is used? So plugins should be coded to do that. If they're not, you can use another plugin to do that. The one I like to use is Asset Cleanup. And then you can actually force unload plugins on pages they're not being used. Very easy to break your website doing that. So keep that in mind. I'll drop this one in the chat. Okay. Okay. Eric asked, is it faster to use strong with a regular font so you only need to load one font or font weight 700 or whatever? So you can use, so it depends. If you're using Divi and you choose a font family and like the module, and then you change your weight, it's going to load that extra font file, regardless of whether you're doing strong or not. So if you really want to cut down your font usage, Divi doesn't make it that easy. You kind of have to hand code some things. But you can do like what's called faux italics, fake italics. You can turn off the italic font, and then the browser will just kind of like turn the letters a little bit. It looks weird, but it'll speed things up a little bit. Sandra said, any thought on the Perf Matters plugin by the Kinsta guys? I don't know if I'm familiar with a WordPress plugin for that, but Perf Matters, I believe, makes this tool. Oh no, this is a different company actually. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that, but Kinsta is a very good company when it comes to speed. Isn't Divi working on page builder speed? Yeah, they're working on making everything fast. We touched on that in the beginning of the call. Archon says recently Google included TBT and CLS. So I think she's referring to the core web, Google's core web vitals. And these are the 3 metrics that Google wants you to meet in order to pass their test that will be used for ranking algorithm. To be clear, this is not going to make or break your rankings. If your website's doing pretty well and you're ranking, towards the top of a page, and let's say you have a competitor that's doing that as well, and your SEO is about the same as theirs, your content's the same, you have a similar reputation, speed will be used as a tiebreaker. Just because you have a fast website, it will not rank you better if your content sucks or you're not reputable. Those matter the most. Really, Google? Oh, here it is. Yeah, so if you really want to get nerdy about the Google stuff, web.dev is Google's website for speed performance, and they'll get into like a lot of the technical stuff there, but for the most part, you will not need to go here. These are the 3 metrics that Google cares about for their new algorithm. Largest contextual paint, how quickly does it take to load the largest element? They want it in 2.5 seconds or less. First input delay, how long does it take for you to interact with the website from the time that you start clicking on it? Usually, this isn't going to be an issue for Divi. CLS is going to be a massive issue for Divi, and until they fix everything, we're not really going to be able to fix CLS. So these are pretty hard to get into the green with a Divi site. But that's basically how those metrics work. If you score in the green on all of those, it's rumored that Google's going to put like a little fast icon next to your pages in the search results. You can also monitor that in Google Search Console. On the left-hand side, Core Web Vitals. If your website gets enough traffic, you'll see this report. If it doesn't get enough traffic, you won't see this report. So this, for example, tells me on mobile, I have 9 good URLs. On desktop, I have 9 good URLs. So this report's telling me that this website's pretty fast. The one thing to keep in mind, this is going to contradict lab data. So if I come back to this test, and I put that website into the browser. It's going to tell us that we're not passing, because passing is 90 to 100, very strict. It's going to tell us we're getting a 50. But for this test, we actually see two sets of data. Right up here, field data, and right down here, lab data. So whenever we test our website using this test, as I said earlier, it does a simulated test. It tests it as if you're using a crappy mid-tier phone on a 3G connection. Worst possible scenario. Depending on your website audience, you know, your audience might not be using that kind of technology or the internet speed. So the users of this website obviously are not, because it's scoring green. So because they have a faster phone and they have a faster internet connection, it loads pretty quick for most actual users. So Google takes that data, rolls it up. It says, well, 75% of all people that visit your website get an LCP in the green. So based on that data, it rolls that up into a report, pulls it into Google Search Console, and gives you a graph on how your pages do over time. This is a good graph you can use to kind of monitor your page performance over time. And then this thing right here, page experience, blah, blah, blah. This is what Google's going to use for this algorithm update. So if a page, you know, scores green on all these tests, it's eligible for supposedly a special badge in the search results. So at the end of the day, speed is very subjective, surprisingly. But follow this guide. Design your website to be fast from the beginning if that's what's important to you. And when it comes to the really technical stuff, don't spend that much time on it, because Divi's going to fix that. All right, looks like we got a few more questions. Seema said, do you use compression options and theme options on Divi? Yeah, so you could leave those on, or you could use a third-party plugin to do it. It's not going to make that much of a difference. What's the usual acceptable speed for mobile nowadays in Pagespeed Insights, being more aggressive and scoring in GT metrics? So that depends on who's considering something acceptable. What's acceptable to you is not going to be acceptable to Google. Google's acceptance criteria is green for the algorithm boost. My rule of thumb is you try to be on the yellow. When it comes to the SEO stuff, you want to more so look at your competitors and look at how they're doing. You know, if all of them are like yellow to green and you're red all the time, then I might want to reevaluate my design and development choices. But all right. What hosting, page speed, and security tool services combination works best with Divi, or would you recommend? So the stack I use is WP Engine for hosting, WP Rocket for speed, Imagify for image optimization. None of those are free. WP Engine is, you know, like 30 a month. WP Rocket is like $250 a year or something like that, and Imagify is well, they have some tiers, but all right. So, any more questions before we wrap up for tonight?
I'd like to just ask, I'm not a full-time web developer and I don't talk to a lot of other web developers, so I don't know what kinds of times are typical or expected or whatever. But my own experience was I was getting time to first bytes of at minimum 5 seconds, and it was terrible. And that was with a shared host. And I went to a WP managed host that had all solid state drives, and it's a second. I mean, it's the difference was gigantic. I didn't do anything else, and all of a sudden my pages were all getting A's.
Yep.
It was just amazing.
Yeah, if you have some really bad hosting, you'll see that. You'll definitely see that. So that's great to hear. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording for today. This will be posted, the link in the comments for tonight's meetup.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Sean.
Great.
Thank you.